Welcome to A Rabbi and a Lawyer Walk Into a Bar, a podcast with relatively well-informed and irreverent musings on religion, news, and society. And now, for your hosts, Rabbi Asher Lopatin and John Geringer.
Hey, John.
Hey, Asher, it's been a rough week for the Jews.
Yeah, and for the world. Oh my gosh, these Saturday nights, they're so difficult. Sometimes there's missiles aimed at Israel. There was murder of the six, and I was 20 years in Chicago. You're still in the Chicago area. The Goldberg-Polin family is very much a Chicago family, and we've known relatives, and we know them, and we know, I think for many people, whether they're from Chicago or not, it feels so personal that Hersh was taken away from us, along with all the others, but it really feels that we have this connection to him. I can imagine Chicago in particular is just where other places, other American Israeli hostages are from. It was so rough. This is the plight of Jews. Sunday was my birthday.
So, sorry I missed it.
No, look, there was a lot. Unfortunately, there was so much sadness. And then Monday, the funeral, and it's really crazy. It's the plight of Jews that we have to enjoy the life that we have. And even though tragically it's taken away from us, I felt the words of Rachel Goldberg that she talked about Hakarat HaTov, thanking God for 23 years of having Hersh was just so incredible. That kind of belief. When I spoke to some Israelis just today, just saying how they have to live their lives, they have to keep living. We can't let Hamas win. They would like to wipe us out. Honestly, not just physically, but spiritually also. We just can't let that happen.
Yeah, I listened to the funeral as well. And afterwards, there was an open letter written to her saying, we understand that you need to mourn and grieve now, but we want you back in the arena. You are such a powerful force. We need you as a Jewish community to be the voice that you were at the Democratic Convention and over the last year. We need that strength to our community. I thought that was a very powerful letter, open letter that was written to her.
Yeah, I think both Rachel and John are just incredible. The team around them, the whole neighborhood of Baca really was just incredible. And the whole world. I know my Rachel would write almost every day to Rachel Goldberg. And I should say, I really want to say that one of the things Rachel Goldberg told me at some point was that she had not heard from Muslims. She had heard from thousands, tens of thousands of people throughout these months, but not from Muslims. A couple of Muslims in Detroit wrote her notes. I asked them to, and one of them, this was like months ago, 6 months ago, but also, or 9 months ago, but just a couple of days ago, one of the Muslims that has really been wonderful. We went to Israel with him, and he's a real Muslim leader in Detroit. He wrote just a note about how devastated he was. But the battle goes on, and it's just really, it's funny when you say, how are things going? Okay, they're going okay. But I think we're always thinking about that. Some things, thank God, are going great. And then we have this just huge tragedy and this huge weight upon us.
As usual, we have to think about these things in the context of the Jewish calendar, right? We just observed Rosh Chodesh Elul, which is the beginning of the season by which we're supposed to prepare for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. There is this notion of Hamelech Basadeh, the king is in the field, so to speak, where God is closer to us. And I always think about that during election season, when even the president of the United States has to go to these state fairs and eat corn dogs and talk to real humans. That's the same sort of analogy I feel like the sages are trying to get to us, that this is the time of year when you could be a little bit closer to God than perhaps you were the rest of the year.
Yeah, John, you're always thinking in political terms. You're a political junkie. But,
Indeed.
And that's great. Yeah. I think in particular, when you think about presidential candidates that are trying to win over people, I think that's an interesting framework for this Elul and these holidays. When we're always normally thinking of, we are trying to do tshuva and repent, that it's so much about our campaign for God. In these days when there's so much frustration and so much of a question of like, where is Hashem and where is God? And it's a time where we're thinking of that God is desperate for us to feel God's presence. And in difficult times, when things are great, Baruch Hashem, oh, thank God, everything's great.
Right.
But when things are really tough, we have to feel God campaigning for this relationship. And Elul, that is an acronym. They say for Anila Dodiva Dodi Li, I am for my beloved is for me, from Song of Songs. And a lot of times think about it like this is our chance to return to Hashem, to do tshuva, but it's also God saying, I'm for you. It's God saying, please, I know how terrible things are. I know how rotten this world feels for you, but I need to be in your life. And I hope that maybe we can feel that in this Elul and together work out, try to move forward with this really tough world.
Yeah, and maybe I'm going to get struck down for this, but I've been more on the mindset of Yisrael, of grappling with God. There's been a lot of incidents over the last few weeks and months where miraculously a terrorist attack did not occur, or the IDF prevented something, or the police prevented something, and the rabbis all shout, Baruch Hashem, thank God. But I have to tell you, I have been so skeptical over the last year. I want to increase my faith like many people have, but I also feel as if after what happened on October 7th, and the more videos, unfortunately, I watch about what happened on that day, the more I am more of the mindset of my jujitsu classes and wrestling with God, rather than being the first to jump up and say, thank God you saved us from another terrorist attack.
Yeah, it's like good to be God because you get all the credit, all the kudos when things go well. Things don't go well, God has a plan. But we do say in our prayers every day, Yotzer Or Uvorei Choshech. We don't let God, as it were, get off the hook or run away. We say that God creates, based on the prophetic words, God creates light and darkness. Oseh Shalom Uvorei Hatakol, really the prophet said Uvorei Ra. It says God creates peace and everything. I think that's okay. It's an okay attitude. I think the thing is just this, not to abandon God. Rabbi Stamfer, blessed memory, a great rabbi who was one of our great rabbis at Anshe Shalom. We had some just amazing, they weren't the rabbi. I was the rabbi, but these were,
there can be only one.
Yeah, but these are wonderful rabbis. And so Rabbi Stamfer always used to talk about that midrash that God is like playing hide and seek with us, and God's hiding, but is desperate for us to be seeking. And the saddest thing is we say, okay, let's go home. Let's forget about God. Let God hide. We gotta hold God to task and ask questions and struggle. But it's so important, I think, to keep an all-powerful God and a sense of goodness and truth and what this world can be within our hearts and minds, and directing us to move us in the right direction. Because I think if we give up on God, it's very tough sailing ahead to really navigate these very rough waters, to keep this analogy going.
Yeah, although I like this idea that you presented, that he has to earn our vote, especially this year. I've read the book from David Weiss Halivni, Breaking the Tablets, writes about Jewish theology after the Shoah. And he talks about a lot of these concepts as well. I'd recommend that to anyone who's interested, because I think the analogies are very apt. But as we progress in Elul, right, through prayer, through study, and through good works of tzedakah and charity and kindness to others, that's what we're told is going to get us through this process.
Yeah, we're going to have a guest on today that really helps us understand a broader meaning of tzedakah. And it's not just like putting money in the pushki. It's really thinking about how our tzedakah can reshape the world and can stand up to some of the tyranny and some of the issues. I'm very excited about this session. But before we get to that, I have a joke. We don't tell jokes so much. I'm not so those who
Is it a clean one?
It's very clean, but it's a God joke. It's about God. And if you've heard this before, just put it on 1.5. And if you already have the podcast on 1.5, put it on 2, whatever.
That's how I listen to mine, 2.0.
2.0. This guy is, the context of what we're saying is God in your life and praising God and all that. So the guy is running late for an interview, a job interview, and he needs parking. And it's in Chicago. I've had this. I would give it a she or a class, and you're trying to park and you're driving around and you can't find. And he says, God, if you open up a space for me, I will be the most pious Jew. I will stop eating pork. I will pray 3 times a day. Just give me that space so I can run in for this interview. And suddenly, miraculously, a space, beautiful space, opens up right away. And he looks up and he says, God, never mind. I got a space.
Back to the pork.
Yeah, exactly. But so keep God in our lives. And I don't like preaching. I just feel I felt this very much when Kara, who is now 21, she's great. She's at Michigan. I think we'll talk about that universities because your kids you have one you just dropped off also.
That's right.
But when she did go through brain cancer and chemo and on the chemo floor with other kids, and there was so much sadness. But I said, I'm not going to let God off the hook. I want God to be there in the hospitals to see those kids that are suffering, and God needs to be there. And so I feel the same way today. I just don't, that faith that Rachel Goldberg has and John Polin have and their speeches, that's on a high level, but on a very basic level, just to keep God together and walking in the field together. So I think that keeps me going.
Wow. Powerful stuff. All right. We talked about tzedakah. I can think of nobody better than Jeff Kaminsky, who I met the one and only time we went to Israel in 2000 on a JUF mission back in the good old days. And here he is. He's done some amazing stuff since. I can't wait to get into this. His real day job is he runs a company called Service Spectrum, which does manufacturing and pressed metal. But his real reason for being on this podcast is the absolutely amazing work he's done with a nonprofit he started called Project Aid and Rescue. And we can't wait to hear more about it. Jeff, how are you?
I'm good, John. It's very nice to see you and talk with you. And it's funny how we've met, 24 years ago, and our paths keep circling back to each other. So thank you for having me on the show.
And recently at Home Depot, which is a place I typically don't go. So it was fortuitous that I wound up at a place that I'm really scared to go into except around Sukkot time.
And Jeff, I think I owe you a meal. I think you won it in an auction.
Yes, there was a JUF auction of some kind back around 99, 2000. I think it was at like the Chicago Theater, something like that. And I said, it would be great to have Shabbat dinner at Rabbi Lopatin's house. So I bought it. I probably spent, I don't know, $1,000 or something like that.
At least, I'm sure
it went. Could have been $10,000.
With all due respect, but $1,000?
I love this guy. $10,000.
It might have been, but I'm like, God, this is amazing. I'm going to have Shabbat dinner at Rabbi and at Lopatin's house. This is great. So we bought it, and I think I reached out and called you, and you were busy, and then I was busy, and it never happened. And then somebody moved away to Ann Arbor, and then I was at Ann Arbor a few months ago. We met again, and I'm like, I know you. And my daughter's there as a junior pre-med at the University of Michigan, and it's a small world.
Okay, so we owe you that dinner. We'll get it. We're closing in. We're closing in.
But
on
just
it.
so
you might want to read the fine print. I think it
I
expired in 2006.
Hey, from my understanding, a good meal at a rabbi's home never expires.
Oh, nice.
Well said. All right, so tell us how you started off from a machine guy to turn into this monstrous do-gooder that's making us all look bad.
I hope I'm not making anybody look bad. I hope, if anything else, I'm inspiring people to want to help. And I hope that I will give people both inspiration and ideas. And if anybody wants to help, reach out to me and we can talk about ways. But I started out by being a volunteer with our fire department. Their team called CERT stands for CERT, Community Emergency Response. And basically, like most young men, I wanted to be a fireman. And then I grew up and I felt there's other opportunities. And my wife saw this notice in the paper and said, hey, they're asking members of the community to come and be trained. And it was a fantastic program that came out of the Bush administration from the 90s during a lot of earthquakes. And the idea behind it is that let's train people in the community to be first responders, because in a real crisis event like an earthquake, hurricane, all the first responders can't get to where they need to be. So I was a Boy Scout and loved the fire department and thought, okay, this is good for me. So I did that. And in that training, I learned how to do triage, first response, how to take control of an accident scene, etc. That was about 10 years ago.
Did you get the uniform?
I got a hat. I got a badge.
That's cool.
I have backpacks of kits in all three of my cars.
Wow.
And I make sure I drive my kids nuts because they're not allowed to go anywhere without certain things in their vehicles. And honestly, most of the time that I'm quote unquote in action is at a vehicle accident.
Wow.
I did put my neighbor's house that was on fire out also, and the fire department said, who did this and how'd you know how to do that? I said, you guys taught me how to do this, so I did it. I couldn't tell if they were happy or mad that I did it before they got there.
Yeah, is there some sort of union thing? You got to be careful about using your own hose.
So you are a good doer, a good deed doer from way back.
I always knew that I was the kind of person, when I saw something, I ran in to help. And whether that's being at a place and somebody passed out, and even though I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a paramedic, I know enough about how to stabilize and help somebody, and as much as I could know beyond going to that step. February 24th happened, 2022, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I'm sitting in my living room watching the TV like everybody else, saying, my God, how is this happening today? Is this really happening? And then when it became obvious that this was not just a minor infraction, but something more serious, I became fixated, and I could not figure out what else to do. I knew I needed to do something. And then I got an email from one of my friends down in Champaign, Rabbi David, and he sent an email on March 5th about how this is personal. My brother, who's the rabbi of Berlin, the Chabad rabbi in Berlin, was evacuating what was 200, then became 400 Jewish orphans from Odessa, Ukraine. Wow. And we need help. We need people to help with this. And knowing my background and reaching out to the gentleman that trained me, who was the fire chief of Northbrook, who had just retired. He was in his 50s, very young man. I called him up. I said, Dave, here's what's going on. He said, Jeff, let's go. And within a couple days, I think Monday night, this happened Friday, Monday night, we were at O'Hare Airport on our way to Germany. I've never actually been to Ukraine, but that is where it began. We started with the evacuation of 200, became 400 children. And then it became clear as people were Berlin was ground zero outside of Poland. It's the wealthiest country in Europe, and all the refugees were going there. They didn't have any place to stay. So I started going around Berlin, and I met up with a very grassroots organization in Berlin, and they had food and they had medical, and they didn't have shelter. They had run out of homes and places where they can put people. So you got a young woman with 3 children, and remember, COVID's still going on, and who were running for their lives over the past 2 weeks. I heard horror stories of cars getting shot up. They wrote children with spray paint on the car, and the Russians used them as target practice. And these women, young mothers with children, because the men were not allowed to leave unless you had 3 or more children. But what happened is that they had no place to stay. And literally some of them were wearing the clothes since February 24th. And what I started to do is go up around Berlin and rent up hotel rooms. I wrote about it on social media, Facebook, and I know that's how John heard about what I was doing, and LinkedIn. And within a short amount of time, Americans, and mostly in the Chicago area and also around North America, were sending me money, including some Israelis. They were sending me money just as an individual. They knew me or knew me through somebody else. And before I knew it, I had $30,000, $40,000. And my uncle said to me,
Wow.
Jeff, you're going to have to start a charity. You're going to be responsible for the taxes. I said, oh, and oh, by the way, you might have an easier time getting money if you're doing something. And I didn't want to start a charity. It wasn't my goal, but it was, okay, here's where I'm at. I can either stop, but the hotel rooms then became bus evacuations. So over the course of the first 8 weeks, we put into hotels about 2,000 people.
This is in Berlin, Jeff?
Mostly Berlin, a few in Poland and Warsaw, mostly in Berlin and around Germany where people were sent.
And were you in Europe? Were you in Europe at the time?
I was in Europe for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And I had met people who then worked with me to continue to do it. And I had money and I'd say, okay, I actually came home sick with COVID. Didn't realize I was sick. And then so I took a 3-week leave absence from my job at the time. I was sick with COVID, and the team that I had met up with and coordinated with in Germany was still going and getting these people off the street. We got a lot of young college age girls off the street that were alone. I was shocked that so many of them were literally traveling alone. I have a young daughter that's in college, and I can't imagine her going anywhere alone, let alone leaving the country. So there was a lot of bad things, people with bad intentions, and the goal was get them safe. We involved women's organizations, and it was just doing what I do in sales and business development. You learn very quickly to read people, and also you learn how to develop partnerships and who you can work with and who you can't. So once the hotels and people were situated, we then started doing bus evacuations, again from Ukraine to Berlin. And now Berlin was opening up a refugee facility and bringing people in. And that's what we started to do.
Jeff, I find this so fascinating also because when we think of Berlin, I know Germany is an amazing 1,000-year-old, 2,000-year-old country, but you think of the Holocaust, and here Jews and really are helping. These are not just Jews you were helping, right?
Not just Jews. In fact, and that's a very interesting point. So at the beginning, when I was working with Chabad, these were, I would say, mostly Jews. And the head of the German Federal Police literally called 6 different border controls and said, these children and families are guests of the German government. And the border control says, yes, but these orphans, they don't have papers, they don't have this, they don't have that. And he said, they are guests of the German government. Let them through. Can you imagine in 2022, the German government welcoming and inviting Jewish orphans into their country to save their lives? And at one point, I put my kippah on and I went to the bus station, the central bus station, and I had it written down in both Yiddish, Ukrainian, and Russian. Is there anybody Jewish here? Are there any Jews here? Because if there were, we were trying to get them to Israel, and we did work to send
the opposite of a selection. Wow,
right?
It was weird.
I wish I could have been there to help with my German.
I don't know any of it, but Google Translate, thank God, I couldn't have done it without you. But you asked if they were Jewish. So then once that was over and I went on my own and I said, look, they're secure.
Right.
More for me to do. I was frustrated. I'm here with the fire chief. He went home after about a week. His daughter was having a baby. I felt defeated. And that's when I hooked up with this organization that was a grassroots that was welcoming the refugees. But I did say to them, when I took them to the hotel, I had it written out and I had everyone who translated, because we had Russian and Ukrainian translators with us. They read a statement that this hotel room and the meals you're about to eat have been donated by Jews from America.
Great.
And I wanted that done specifically because of the fact that there was so much history. Most people don't realize that they know of the Holocaust, but they don't necessarily think of Ukraine as death camps. And I think that there was something like 1.5 million Jews were slaughtered by not just the Nazis, but by also other Jew haters, if you will, in
Yeah, the
what
eyesight's
is
grouping.
present day
Yeah.
Ukraine.
It's such a crazy world. So when and we're going to get to your work with Israel, when you think about how John and I were talking about this week, so devastating with the news about not just Hersh, of course, the 6 innocent, precious souls being murdered, and so many more. There were so many terrible things about this world, and for the Ukrainian people also. But then you hear about this, how things are so different, how this world is a much better place in many ways. And I'm thinking about, on the one hand, you had the meals in the hotel room sponsored by Jews in America. And then I'm thinking about getting back to Chicago, Yechiel Eckstein of blessed memory, his organization, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, and the packages when they're feeding Jews
in Ukraine.
Christians say this is Christians helping out Jews. And there's like this mixture of such goodness in this world, and then deja vu. But so this experience and your work here somehow got you to be ready for October 7th.
So once I came home and I made the decision, okay, I'm going to continue, I was contacted by a woman that was trying to evacuate people. It all started with one request. I got a request because I had hotel rooms, and I would post things on different sites. I had to be careful because I had a screen who was coming, but there were a lot of chat groups for refugees. And I said, any refugees need hotel rooms in Berlin, contact me. And I learned how to screen because I wanted to go to the people who needed it the most, the elderly, the sick, the young families. And one of the requests I got was, can I put 55 people into a hotel room? And I said, 55 people, what's going on? And he explained that he's doing a bus evacuation and they're passing through. And I worked with the hotel and I worked with some donors. And of course, not all of our donors are Jewish. Many of them are, but we ended up having a hotel, and it was amazing. 55 people coming to this one hotel. And from there, that was the beginning of I think we did 50 or 60 bus evacuations over the next year and a half. And I think I tallied up once between the people that we put into hotel rooms and the people we evacuated. I believe I have touched somewhere around 10,000 people that we got out or helped in some way. And that's how Project Aid and Rescue got started. And then I hooked up with another couple of organizations, a lot of partnerships. I don't do anything alone. There's a lot of people that I work with. Operation White Stork, William McNulty is a Marine, and he was sending over IFAKs. And IFAK is an individual first aid kit. It's something that NATO forces have, a chest seal, a tourniquet, and all these different things in it. And the Ukrainians didn't have that. So he was doing that. And he had medical bandages. And I, having a background in manufacturing and logistics, I was importing and bringing in the facades of Audi dealerships, the Audi cars. So that's all perforated metal. And that's something that I make. And I had a logistical relationship. So we were doing that. And he said, Jeff, can you help us get this over? So I was able to find donors to pay for air freight to send over containers, truckloads of medical stuff. And so one thing led to another and then we got medicines donated, short dated stock, medicines that were almost to be expiring, zithromycin, gabapentin, and others. And we ended up donating what would retail for close to $100 million worth of medical equipment that was either flown over or shipped over in containers. One of my other partners, Sharita from World of Connections, I talked to her tonight because we're doing 2 more containers that are going to Kherson, and she's up to about 500 shipping containers that she has personally touched and orchestrated. So all that led up to that logistical moving stuff in and out. That happened into the rest of 22 into 23. And then this October 7th, 23 comes along. And we all know what happened. The worst tragedy in Israel's history. The country is under attack and the entire country shuts down from being able to get aid in. Every airline stopped working except for El Al.
So all the lessons that you learned from the Ukraine operation, you utilized in Israel.
So I was working with an organization called UAST that was a group of people like myself who had banded together and were really helping. And you had to be very trusted. You had to work with people you knew. And we were working together in Europe and Ukraine and evacuations, but we also had an Israel chat group. Mm-hmm. And the leader, Sean, who organized this group, very quickly opened up a very specific Israel evacuation. Remember, we're trying to get people out and get aid in. And everybody was going to the Costco and buying stuff and Rite Aid and Walgreens and buying bandages and socks and throwing in duffel bags. And it was a cluster, just a mess. There was zero organization. But of course, you guys know United Hatzalah.
By the way, we did not censor the second half of that cluster. So I just wanted to,
I didn't. It was a
cluster. That was self-centered, Jeff.
Cluster muck. Yes, it was just a mess. So on these chats were a lot of large organizations, people with business experience and charity work, United Hatzalah, a friend of mine, Michael Brown. And he's literally screaming through the chat, does anybody have any way to get aid in? And I literally called every contact I had at the consulate, at the Knesset, the Israeli consulate, the Knesset. I was working who were very high up in the Ministry of Defense, people I had connected with casually through Ukraine, because even though things publicly were one way, Israel vis-a-vis Ukraine, behind the scenes there was a lot. There was quite a few very a great deal of Israelis actually had done a lot of aid and evacuations in Ukraine. And my partners that are working with still today are people I worked with, Israelis who I worked with in Ukraine, and I'm now working with in Israel.
How were you able to get stuff in, Jeff, to Israel?
So 6 days after the war began, I get a call from the Ministry of Health's newly created Department of Disaster and Emergency Response. And she's the head of supply and logistics.
Wow.
And she's calling me, just this business guy in Chicago.
Look at you, big shot.
I was honored.
Had I known, I would have been nicer to you on our bus ride.
I want to talk to you about that, actually. And it was Friday. It was right before Shabbos. It must have been Shabbos already for her. And I was like shocked. And I immediately got Sharita on the phone. And I said, okay, what do you need? What do you have in place already? And she says, we don't have anything. Wow. I said, what? You don't have any logistics? No. I said, how is that possible? You're Israel. She says, we're Israel. We're used to sending stuff out, not bringing stuff in at this level. So I set up a meeting the very next morning, and I brought on 10 people, including one of I call her a colleague, partner, who was with the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and many other logistics and supply people. And it became clear right away that they needed help. Their main goal was getting medical equipment to the hospitals. They had to fortify 40 hospitals in Israel because they were afraid of attacks.
Wait, Jeff, the UN helped get supplies to Israeli hospitals or
no?
It wasn't UNRWA.
No, it wasn't. But this person who worked with us in Ukraine was part of the World Health Organization. She was Jewish, and she's a very high-level young woman, and she knew how to work with government-to-government entities. And she said, there's ways that this needs to happen, but Israel needs to initiate things. So I learned very quickly something I wasn't used to, and that's this thing called politics and bureaucracy. I'm a bit of a maverick. I don't like in sales and business development. You have to figure out how to get from point A to point B. Sometimes you go over, under, around. It's not so crystal clear, but you got to figure it out, and you're used to getting no's. I was not used to the bureaucracy of the Israeli government.
And so naive.
He learned fast.
So naive. And I could
if you think bank regulators are tough.
You're right. I could send nearly or newly and recently expired medications to Ukraine, and they would welcome it in because if it's for humanitarian purposes, obviously it still has a shelf life after the date. Israel says, no, absolutely not. First of all, they make most things there, but there was a shortage. And remember at the beginning, there was this huge controversy between everybody knows soldiers. Everybody knows people who are caught up, and they're like begging for helmets and vests and this and that. And the Israeli IDF government said, no, we got everything. It just takes some time to get. Here we are 11 months later, and the troops and the people on the front lines are still requesting it.
Wow.
So shame on those people. And I'm not going to mention any names right now, but we roll up.
We don't want to get canceled as a podcast. So let's be careful about enough out there already.
To go up. A little controversy causes ratings to go up, actually. So the Ministry of Health focused on these hospitals, and they needed stuff. And then
amazing,
they gave us a list of things. And I contacted JUF, and I said, hey, I've been contacting. They're like, well, why are they contacting you? And I said, I don't know, maybe
it's
because I've sent
story about how
sent $100 million worth of antibiotics and medical equipment to Ukraine. Maybe I actually do know what I'm doing. And eventually, working with JUF to whatever extent we could, I knew they could do certain things, and there's certain things that they couldn't do. This is how it works. It's just you've got to stay in your lane. And
who's going to play you in the movie, though?
No,
but it's an interesting story about how individuals, you can't just leave it up to the big institutions, whether it's the government of Israel or the ministry, or whether it's Jewish organizations here. They're wonderful. I work for one, but I work for a little foundation, a little federation. It's interesting how you gotta be a little Jeff
entrepreneurial,
Kaminsky.
Really. It's like charity entrepreneurial.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think we're gonna have to wrap it up here, but it was so inspired by that you weren't turned off. Also, like Ukraine, you weren't turned off by the UN. Ukraine, you weren't turned off by Ukraine. I don't know. There was a lot of, like you said, a lot of anti-Semitism. Ukraine doesn't always vote. They vote against Israel in the UN a lot. So you weren't turned off by all this.
I was interested in helping save lives.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the right thing to do. You could say it's the Jewish thing to do. I went to Camp Ramah. I learned about Israel through Camp Ramah, and of course, my own synagogue. I think I said it on that trip when I was vice president of YLD. And I remember saying at one point, I'm not the guy that's supposed to be sitting here. And I'm not the guy that's supposed to be sitting here because I wasn't raised in a Shomer Shabbos home. My father was not interested in any religiosity whatsoever. My mother was the driver to get us to Hebrew school, and because of that, I went to Ramah. And through Ramah, I learned about Israel, and I went on seminar. And I am who I am a lot because of the Jewish camp experience, as well as the other things that happened in my life. I don't like bullies. I was bullied as a kid. I was called a kike as a kid in junior high. And my dad said, either you kick his ass or I'm going to kick yours. And he taught me how to fight. And he literally
that is the south side of Chicago, for those of you who are not from here.
I grew up in South Holland, Illinois, and then later moved to home in Flossmoor.
Wait, so I got to hear what happened. So you went up to the bully and you kicked his tuchus?
He was a foot taller than me, and every day in gym, he called me a kike.
So what happened? Your dad?
I was a spineless kid, and he took me out back. He said, I'm going to teach you how to fight. I said, Dad, the guy's going to kill me. He says, no, you throw a punch and then another punch and another punch, and you do not stop. I said, what if you get tired? What if I get tired? He says, you won't. There's something called adrenaline. I said, adrenaline, right. What's that? You'll learn.
So what happened?
He taught me how to fight, and he got mad at me, and he taught me what to do. And he says, I will back you up. I don't care if they suspend you, because they had contacted the principal.
Get to the
point.
I kicked his ass. That's what I did. I beat him up.
There you go.
And that was it. And I got a standing ovation by the entire school afterwards. To this day, I'm fighting in a situation in my own community right now. Where the library is trying to bring in this thing, and I wrote a very strong worded letter. And
Jeff,
but the Golden Hour Project. One more thing I'd like to talk about is we partnered with a group, Health Research and Science, which is a group of doctors, an NGO group in Israel, and we've been focusing on the Golden Hour, that hour of a traumatic event that is the difference between life and death. And we've been providing mobile ultrasounds, and we've been providing specialized laryngoscopes. We've been providing a mobile ultrasound. Everyone knows what an ultrasound is,
Right.
but you can scan the body and instantly see whether you've got internal bleeding, a collapsed lung. And I know I sent you guys an article about how NATO has recognized how the Israel casualties of the IDF is so low compared to other other armies because of projects like this.
Wow.
So we are working with this, and we ask donors to help us to fund and send medical equipment to Israel that we can help to save lives.
Jeff,
Wow. Thank you so much for coming on the
amazing.
podcast, Jeff. We really appreciate it. It's great to reconnect on and off over the last 20 or so years, and let everybody know. And we'll put it when we launch it on Facebook when Asher posts it. But tell us how people can get a hold of you.
The best way to get a hold of me is through email, and that's Jeff at aid, AIDAND, rescue.org. Aid and rescue.org.
Okay.
Jeff at aidandrescue.org.
And Jeff, you come to Detroit and you got a Shabbos meal anytime.
Better be worth $1,000, Asher.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll make it worth your while. Good. Look, it's amazing what one person can do. And like Jeff said, he's done it with a lot of other people, a lot of people joining him, but just going out. And I think it's good. There's a little bit of chutzpah. That's the way Israel works a lot. And you got to go out there and then someone else say, who are you to do this? I'm a Jew and I'm a human being and I have to do it. So that was amazing. I do have a little side point because he talked about, I think he mentioned University of Michigan.
He did. His kid is there.
And so your kid, Katie, went to Wisconsin. My daughter, and this week, my daughter is a sophomore in Michigan, and I went to a vigil that the students did for the 6 that were murdered and for all those who are still held hostage and who were killed. And it was I'm finding that there were like hundreds, and I think it was 500 or 1,000, but huge group of students. They're young, and all the groups came together. Chabad, the JRC, they're more ultra-Orthodox, Kiruv group, Hillel, J Street U, go figure. Wow. Everyone came together, and it was beautiful. There were no protesters at that. I'm so optimistic, and call me naive, but I'm seeing a shift. And I'll just say that from Michigan's point of view, the week before, there was a small group that did a die-in protesting on the diag, and the police hauled them away, and they arrested 4 people who weren't, of course, even students who were there. They're really cracking down on it. There's no encampment there, and it's a small group, and we're seeing that NYU is saying explicitly that if you discriminate against Zionists, you're discriminating against Jews, and that because Zionism is part of the Jewish identity for many Jews.
And it looked like the Michigan cops were growing a backbone.
Yes, that's all it takes. Gosh, look, some places, I don't know, people can write in, but I think there's a lot of deep-seated anti-Semitism at Harvard in some places. So that's a harder problem. But Michigan is a good institution. I don't think there is embedded anti-Semitism, but there is this wimpiness and lack of courage. And now they're just getting, like you said, a backbone. And University of Illinois also declared that discriminating against people because of their Zionism is discrimination. It's anti-Semitism because most Jews love Israel and care for Israel, and Israel is special for most Jews. That's in their identity. What about Wisconsin?
It's funny. We brought her into the dorm, and then we were going to go walk on the quad. And I said something to the effect, let's go see some protests. And of course, she wanted to shut me up right away. But we walk around, and there was nothing to be seen. Zero. The only thing I saw was a little bit of chalk on the sidewalk. And then we saw someone yelling, and then we realized she was just a random crazy person who had nothing to do with Palestine or Gaza or Hamas. And so I was let down because I wanted to see what it was all about. And in a good way, it wasn't there.
Yeah. Look, it's early, and certainly Hamas and Qatar and all those that hate us and the anti-Semites from the left and from the right want to do things. My job now in Ann Arbor, I get to do things on a smaller scale. I went to City Hall and spoke for the city council. That was Tuesday night, actually. That was right after that vigil. And almost a lot of the city councilors responded. I only spoke for a few minutes, and they responded. They really felt terrible about anti-Semitism and the sympathy for the Jewish community. So who knows? I hear bad things from New York. I don't know what the story is there, but I hope this thing turns around a little bit and people realize that these protesters, they're fueled by hatred of America and by ignorance and by anti-Semitism, and for the health of these institutions, it's got to stop.
We can show the rest of the nation what Midwest nice really means.
Exactly. Look, let's hope for better times. Let's hope for the next podcast will be a happier podcast. And let's hope with Jeff, like the UN. Okay, it was good to hear some good things about the UN. Only on this podcast.
If he can make the UN do tshuva, I think we are looking for a brighter world.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do some wrestling with God, and I hope God does some serious campaigning to save the Jewish people, and to, God willing, we'll work with God to make this a better world.
Amen. I love it.
Okay, take care. Be well. Bye-bye.
Good to say.
Thank you for listening to this episode of A Rabbi and a Lawyer Walk Into a Bar. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to get our next episode delivered right to you. If you really like us, please consider leaving a review and sharing this with a friend. That would really help our efforts. And finally, to contact us and for more show-related information, please visit our website, rabbilawyerbar.com. Special thanks to our production team, David Stone for the introduction music, Andrew Bauman for the artwork, and I'm Nicholas Tantillo. This podcast is co-produced with Front and Social Studios in Chicago. Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. Copyrighted material, all rights reserved.